Three aircraft carriers entered World War II as sisters. All three fought at Midway. Two were sunk in combat. The third survived the war, only to be sold for scrap. Today, none of the three exists as a complete ship. USS Yorktown lies thousands of meters beneath the Pacific. USS Hornet rests on the seafloor near the Solomon Islands. And USS Enterprise, the most decorated of the three, was cut apart in a New Jersey scrapyard. They were built from the same design. They fought in the same war. But their final destinations could hardly be more different. The three ships were USS Yorktown, USS Enterprise, and USS Hornet. They belonged to the Yorktown-Class, a group of large American fleet carriers designed before the war. The class was considered among the most capable carrier designs of its time. But their importance became clear in 1942, when the United States desperately needed every carrier it could put into the Pacific. At the Battle of Midway, these three ships formed the core of the American carrier force, and all three took part in the attacks that destroyed 4 Japanese carriers, but only one of the three would survive the war. The first sister was USS Yorktown. By the beginning of 1942, Yorktown had already been through combat. She was damaged during the Battle of the Coral Sea, but American shipyard workers repaired her in an extraordinary rush. Instead of remaining in the yard for months, Yorktown was sent toward Midway. On June 4th, she launched aircraft against the Japanese carrier force. Later that day, Japanese aircraft found her. Bombs and torpedoes caused severe damage. Yorktown lost power and began listing. Her crew abandoned the carrier, but the ship did not immediately sink. Salvage teams went aboard. A tow was arranged. For a moment, it appeared that Yorktown might survive. Then another Japanese submarine attack changed everything. On June 6th, Japanese submarine I-168 fired torpedoes at Yorktown. The carrier was hit again, along with the destroyer USS Hammond. Yorktown remained afloat through the night. At about 5:30 the next morning, the list became much worse. At 7:01 a.m., June 7th, 1942, Yorktown rolled onto her port side and disappeared beneath the Pacific. She sank in roughly 3,000 fathoms of water. For almost 56 years, that was where the story ended. Then, in May 1998, an expedition led by underwater explorer Robert Ballard, together with the U.S. Navy and National Geographic, located the wreck. Yorktown was sitting upright on the seafloor at roughly 5 kilometers below the surface. And the wreck was not simply a scattered field of debris. Much of the carrier remained recognizable. More than 2 decades later, researchers went back. In 2023, Ocean Exploration Trust and partners conducted a detailed survey of the wreck. Then, in April 2025, NOAA and its partners returned with remotely operated vehicles and explored areas that had never been examined in detail before. They found something that changed the picture of the wreck. Inside Yorktown's hangar deck were aircraft that had gone down with the carrier. At least 3 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers were documented there. One of them still appeared to have a 500-pound bomb secured beneath it. Researchers also located a hand-painted mural inside one of the aircraft elevator shafts, a map showing Yorktown's voyages. So today, Yorktown is not just a shipwreck. It is an underwater record of the Battle of Midway, preserved more than 3 miles beneath the Pacific. But Yorktown was only the first sister to disappear. The second was USS Hornet. Hornet had entered service only months before the United States entered World War II. And within a year, she had already become one of the most famous American carriers of the war. In April 1942, 16 B-25 bombers were launched from her flight deck for the Doolittle raid against Japan. A few weeks later, Hornet joined Enterprise and Yorktown at Midway. The 3 sisters were now fighting in the same battle. But 4 months later, Hornet's fate was sealed. On October 26, 1942, during the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, Japanese aircraft repeatedly attacked the carrier. Bombs and torpedoes caused catastrophic damage. Hornet was burning and unable to operate normally. American destroyers attempted to scuttle her. They fired torpedoes and hundreds of shells into the damaged carrier, but Hornet refused to sink. The American ships eventually withdrew, as Japanese forces approached. Japanese destroyers then attacked the abandoned carrier. Their torpedoes finally sent Hornet to the bottom. She had been in commission for just over a year, and then Hornet disappeared. For more than 7 decades, her exact resting place remained unknown. That changed in January 2019. An expedition aboard the research vessel RV Petrel used wartime records, action reports, deck logs, and positions reported by other ships to narrow down the search area. The first autonomous underwater vehicle dive located the wreck. Hornet was sitting upright on the seafloor at a depth of roughly 5,400 meters, almost 17,500 feet below the surface. The carrier's wreckage was still recognizable. Her guns remained visible. Aircraft equipment was scattered across the deck, and pieces of the ship that had burned and broken away during the battle were still lying nearby. Hornet had finally been found, so 2 of the 3 sisters now have a final resting place. Both are underwater. Both were lost in combat. But the 3rd sister followed a completely different path. USS Enterprise was the only Yorktown-class carrier to survive World War II, and surviving was not the same as being preserved. Enterprise fought through some of the most important carrier battles of the Pacific War. She took part in the Doolittle Raid, Midway, the Eastern Solomons, Santa Cruz, Guadalcanal, the Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and other operations. By the end of the war, Enterprise had become one of the most heavily decorated American ships in history. She survived attacks that destroyed her sisters. She survived the war itself. And for a short time, there was an attempt to save her. The plan was to turn Enterprise into a national memorial in Washington, D.C. Congress even authorized the establishment of the memorial. But there was a problem. Moving and repairing a huge wartime carrier would cost too much. The estimated cost reached about $1 million at the time. The money was never raised. Enterprise was decommissioned in 1947. She was eventually sold for scrap in 1958. By February 1960, the ship had been completely dismantled. That means the sister that survived the most battles is now the only one of the 3 that is not resting as a recognizable wreck. Yorktown is underwater. Enterprise was dismantled piece by piece, but there is one final detail that makes their story even more unusual. The 3 ships were not simply 3 unrelated carriers that happened to fight in the same battles. They were sisters built from the same basic design. At Midway, they formed the core of the American carrier force, and together, their aircraft helped destroy 4 Japanese carriers in a battle that changed the direction of the Pacific War. Yet the ocean now holds 2 of them. The 3rd disappeared into the industrial process that followed the war. One was destroyed by repeated attacks and finally sunk by a submarine. One survived a devastating battle, was abandoned, and was later found more than 5 kilometers underwater. And one survived the entire war, only to be lost because preserving an old carrier was considered too expensive. That is where the 3 Yorktown-class carriers are now. Not together. Not in a museum. Not sailing under the American flag. Yorktown remains on the seafloor of the Pacific, where modern expeditions are still discovering details about her final battle. Hornet rests deep in the South Pacific, finally located after more than 70 years. And Enterprise exists only in photographs, surviving artifacts, records, and the memory of the sailors who served aboard her. 3 sister ships entered the war together. 2 became underwater archaeological sites. 1 became scrap. And, after everything they survived, none of the 3 made it into the present as a complete ship.